The 2020 census is upon us, and many people have concerns about what the government will ask and what it will do with the information.
News 8's Shannon Handy asks state leaders what you should know and is here now with today's Verify. Shannon?
Barbara Lee and Marcella, local and state leaders gathered in San Diego today to go over how they will be able to reach as many Californians as possible for the 2020 census. One challenge they're up against: illegal immigrants are skeptical about the process and therefore may not take part. So we wanted to look into those concerns and verify some things.
Most of you know who you are.
During a workshop in San Diego's Mountain View neighborhood Friday, local and state leaders came together with one mission: how to ensure Californians know just how crucial the 2020 census is.
It's literally billions upon billions of dollars in federal funding for California, for housing, for transportation infrastructure, for health care.
The census also determines our representation in Congress, which is why Secretary of State Alex Padilla says every person living here, regardless of immigration status, needs to take part. In regards to specific questions, will the 2020 census have one related to citizenship? The answer is no. Following a multi-state lawsuit, the Supreme Court recently made the decision to remove it from the 2020 census. We looked at official census documents and found questions regarding sex, residence, and race are included, but nothing on one's immigration status. Secretary Padilla says that won't change.
No, there's no way that the Trump administration can try to step on California and try to do the census his way.
Which leads us to our next question. Is your information protected? Yes. Under federal law, the United States Census Bureau is required to keep personal information it collects confidential. What if you still don't want to participate? Do you have that option? Under federal law, no. Refusing to answer any census question or intentionally giving a false answer to one can result in a fine. Returning an incomplete census may lead to a phone call or an in-person visit to your home by workers from the Census Bureau. Starting in March, you'll receive an invitation to take part in the 2020 census online. In April, a paper questionnaire will be sent out if you prefer to do it that way.
California has stepped up with state funding $187 million for census outreach, awareness, and assistance because we know what's at stake.
Complete the census, that is. The government is hiring thousands of people. For more information on that and the 2020 census, just go to our website, cbs8.com, and click on the Hot button. Marcella?
Shannon, thanks. And if you have a Verify story idea you think we'd be interested in, just send an email to verify@kfmb.com.